Hi, it's Steph, and I'm at the Home Depot, and my store is fully stocked with a new shipment of inventory. There are perennials, trees, shrubs, and still lots of beautiful summer blooming annuals. So let's go ahead and take a look at the June inventory at the Home Depot. Some beautiful delphiniums. Now these are a gorgeous tall perennial for the garden. On average, they get to be about 30 inches in height, which means they would be great for the second row of a border. The other perennials in the border can also hold them up because sometimes in wind, they do have a tendency to topple a little because they're such top heavy blooms. You can stake them if you'd like with something like a peony ring to keep them nice and upright, but look how beautiful the coloration on these are. They look purple, but there is a hint of blue, which makes these so beautiful. They also come in shades of pink, and I've also seen white. Now this is in the Home Depot colored containers, $14.98. They do like full sun. This is the Del Genius Kinsley variety, and they get to be 12 to 30 inches in height, 12 inches in width, hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and they bloom late spring through midsummer. And these plants are still tightly budded, and my tendency is at the garden center to buy the plant that's still tightly budded. The reason for that is so that it can bloom for longer in my garden. The only caveat is if there is a variety of plant that comes in multiple colors, I will pick the one that's already blooming just to make sure that I get the color that I want for my garden. Delphiniums are also deer and rabbit resistant, and they want to be grown in full sun in a sheltered location where they're not going to get pummeled by wind. That way you have less of a chance of them toppling over. And Yarrow or Achillea, these are a gorgeous garden perennial. They have so much texture in them because they have this fern-like foliage, which contrasts beautifully with other perennials in the garden. They're also pretty deer and rabbit resistant and drought tolerant. They do best in full sun. That will keep them from toppling over or splitting in the center. Some varieties are taller than others, but in general, they are very easy perennial and gorgeous addition to a sunny border. So this variety is the Sassy Summer Taffy. It gets to be 18 to 24 inches in height, 24 inches in width, and very hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And it blooms early to late summer. And what I love about them as well is that the blooms go through several different color changes. So they typically emerge a bit of a darker color like you see there, and then they'll get a medium shade of that color before fading to a lighter version of that color. So it almost looks like you get multiple colors in one plant just based on the stage of the blooms. So a really good one to add to the garden. And here, this dark, gorgeous foliage belongs to the dark side of the moon Astilbe by Proven Winners. And what's interesting about this variety of Astilbe is that typically Astilbe is a shade plant. You get these gorgeous plume type blooms here in my Zone 6B 7A garden at some point in mid to late June. And this variety is bred to be able to handle more sun. Now, I will tell you, after growing it in my garden for 2 seasons, that it will do best with about 4 hours of morning sun. If you give it hot afternoon sun, the leaves can get a little crispy, sort of what you see here, because these are in full sun here at the garden center. The blooms are already starting to form on these, and they're a pretty shade of purple. There's one here that's a little further ahead, so I'm gonna go ahead and get that for you to see. That's what it looks like right there. So a really pretty variety of Astilbe. Here are the specs on the dark side of the moon Astilbe. It reads that they like full sun, full shade. I would say full shade or part sun. 4 hours of morning sun will be best because it's a little softer. They get to be 20 to 22 inches in height, and they need 24 to 28 inch spacing. They're hardy in zones 4 through 9 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and they bloom midsummer to late summer. So this variety does seem to form buds a little bit later than my other traditional Astilbe varieties in my garden, so this may also be a later bloomer. What I love about these Proven Winner tags is that it also tells you pairing suggestions. So kind of like pairing your wines and your cheeses, it says right here to pair this Astilbe with coral bells, sedge, or Ligularia, which I actually do have mine paired with some bottle rocket Ligularia, and Japanese painted fern. Oh, that would look gorgeous. The painted fern foliage with this dark foliage, really great combination. And Astilbes also like a good amount of water, so a moist but well-draining soil, and they're hungry plants. So fertilize them in late winter, early spring in order for them to bloom best. And the Dark Side of the Moon Astilbe is in a 3-gallon container for $24.98. You can actually take these large plants home, divide them right down the center. Make sure you keep them well watered until they start establishing some roots, and you can get 2 plants for the price of 1. I do this all the time, or you can just keep it this way and just have 1 large plant right off the start. Some hydrangea shrubs. Now this variety here is the Quickfire Fab. Now the traditional Quickfire is gorgeous. It's a panicle type hydrangea. Panicles can take more sun. It's also a larger hydrangea, getting to be that 6 to 8 feet tall and wide range. But the Quickfire Fab has been bloomed to be more floriferous, so it gets more flowers in the blooms. They also are a little bit earlier to bloom, and they get this gorgeous rosy color in cooler climates as we get into midsummer into late summer. So this one here is hardy in zones 3 through 8, or down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Gets to be 6 to 8 feet in height, 5 to 6 feet in width. It's early blooming, a cold hardy, and it likes sun to part sun. Really pretty one. And this one here is in a number 2 container for $29.98, the Quickfire Fab. This is what they start out like, usually a green color to a creamy shade of white before starting to get these pink shades mid to late summer. Another great variety of panicle hydrangea is the Little Hottie by First Editions. Now this is the First Editions version of what I like to compare to the Little Lime by Proven Winners. I actually grow the Little Lime in a hedge over by my shed, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But I have heard really great things about this First Editions Little Hottie as well. The Little Hottie panicle hydrangea wants full sun to part shade. It gets to be 3 to 5 feet in height, 3 to 5 feet in width, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 8. And it says it's drought tolerant after it's established, but in general, hydrangeas do like a moist but well-draining soil. And this one is all budded up and getting ready to bloom. And this is in a number 3 container for $36.98. Another really great multi-season interest shrub is the sweetspire, or the Itea virginica. What's great about them is that they get these really fragrant bottle brush type blooms in the spring. This one's actually done blooming at this point, but they also get foliage color changes. So in the fall, this foliage will actually be red. Look at that. Such a pretty shrub. They also come in different sizes, and they're a moisture loving shrub. So if you have an area in your garden that maybe retains a little bit too much moisture and you have a hard time getting anything to thrive there, a sweetspire would be a great option. So this variety here says that it's hardy in zones 5 through 9. It is deer resistant, and it has medium to high water needs, and it gets to be 3 to 4 feet in height and 3 to 4 feet in width. It wants to be grown in full sun to part shade. They also currently have lots of Hosta in stock, but they're out here in full sun. So hopefully these sell quickly, because I don't think they'll be happy in this area for very long, because Hosta is a shade plant. And they're actually a great way to add a lot of color to a shady garden, because they come in lots of different colorways as well as patterns on the foliage. Now Hosta also bloom, and the bloom stalks that they get, you can see that there's actually one right here. The blooms will open up to a bell-shaped flower in shades of white and light lavender, and the pollinators absolutely love them. So if you prefer to cut them off, you can, but I would suggest leaving them up for a little while for the pollinators to enjoy. They usually only last about 2 weeks or so. Now hostas are pretty low fuss plants. They're super cold tolerant, very easy to divide. In fact, you can see this one here. If you take this home, you can actually split it right down the middle. You can probably get 2, maybe even 3 plants out of it, right out of this container. Hosta are not deer resistant. In fact, they're like deer salad. So if you deal with deer, that's something that you should be aware of. They also sometimes get attacked by things like slugs, and these are relatively healthy here at the store, but you can kind of tell when there's slug damage because there'll be some holes through the leaves. But if you plant these in a shady garden and you don't deal with deer, they're an excellent perennial. This one here has a really pretty bright chartreuse color, and you can see what a nice contrast that is to the green foliage. And this one is called August Moon. They also get different sizes. So some of them are more compact, others are really large. So this one gets to be 24 to 30 inches in height, needs 30-inch spacing, and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And this one here is a really popular variety with green in the center and a creamy white outer margin, and it is called the Hosta Patriot. Hosta Patriot gets to be 18 to 27 inches in height, 24 to 36 inch spacing, also hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And some gorgeous garden phlox. In my opinion, this is a perennial that every full sun garden should have. Now they come in several different varieties. In early spring, you can get the ground cover variety of creeping phlox. And then as we get into late spring and summer, there are several varieties of garden phlox that come in different heights. Even if you garden in shade, you can find a couple of varieties of woodland phlox. They come in a light periwinkle kind of purple color, and they also come in shades of white. But this one is a garden phlox in a really pretty shade of pink. It's actually called the Forever Pink and has an upright growth habit. They do like full sun, the garden phloxes for the most part. This variety blooms mid to late summer. It gets 16 inches in height, so based on that, it would be good for a front of a border, and it needs 24 to 36 inch spacing, hardy down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you should pay attention to the spacing on phlox because some of the older varieties are susceptible to powdery mildew, and that's when you look like you have a powdery substance on the foliage, and that's because they're not getting proper airflow. So if you give them enough space where they get a lot of air circulation around them, that can prevent some of that powdery mildew from setting in. They also have a white variety of phlox here in the Home Depot brand container, and this variety is called the Hybrid Phlox Baby Doll White. And the size on this one is also 12 to 16 inches in height, so good for the front of a border, 14 to 16 inches in width, and negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit hardiness zone. And they attract butterflies, so also a great perennial for pollinators. The last time we were here at the Home Depot, I had shown you this variety of hardy geranium called the Boom Chocolata by Proven Winners. And what's interesting about it is that it has these red stems and the foliage is darker with a red margin. Well, today it's in full bloom, so you can see these beautiful lavender colored flowers. The pollinators absolutely love them, and they're just a really pretty geranium. You can see with that dark foliage with the light purple bloom, it's really striking. And look how it looks so pretty right on the side of that Coreopsis with that different foliage. The Coreopsis has like a thread-like foliage, really pretty combination. The Boom Chocolata geranium gets to be 24 to 26 inches in height. It wants to be grown in full sun, part sun. And it needs 28 to 30 inch spacing, hardy in zones 4 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And it says that it blooms early to late summer. I would say here in my zone 6B, 7A, it will bloom in early summer because mine is actually already starting to bloom in my garden. It's a really good one. And these Proven Winners plants are in it looks like a 1 gallon container for $12.98. Coreopsis is a workhorse perennial. It is loaded with buds all season long, always pumping out new blooms. Look at that. They remind me very much of Cosmos, and Cosmos are an annual, so this is almost like a perennial version of a Cosmo. This one even has that thread-like foliage that looks like Cosmos. And the variety is the Designer Threads Golden Needles Coreopsis by Proven Winners. It wants full sun, and it gets to be 18 to 20 inches in height, and it needs 20 to 22 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 5 through 9 or down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms early to late summer. That's a real pretty one. And you can see how nice it pairs with a purple perennial. And talk about a phlox that is ultraviolet. This one is bright and really gets your attention. It is the Luminary Ultraviolet Phlox by Proven Winners. It gets to be 32 to 36 inches in height. It wants to be grown in full sun, 28 to 32 inch spacing. Hardy in zones 3 through 8 or down to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Now these newer varieties are more resistant to powdery mildew, so there would be a great reason to try them. This phlox also appears to almost have like different color on it depending on what stage the bloom is in. So this one almost looks like it has a purple edging to it, and when they first start out, they're a really vibrant kind of fuchsia pink. And because I love combining plants, I'm going to share with you a combo of 3 plants that I would pick up today at the garden center if I was starting a new sunny border. And I picked these for different reasons. First of all, I picked a phlox because they can be a bit taller and they would serve as the back of the border plant. They also have a pretty kind of round floral or bloom pattern. Then I would go with something like a Coreopsis, and you could pick the threadleaf varieties or even this one that has this really pretty kind of lemony yellow bloom, because I think those colors combine beautifully together. And then for some vertical interest, I would pick up something like a salvia or a nepeta in a shade of purple, because those 3 colors look really complementary: the pink, the yellow, and the purple. You can even go with a white phlox, and that would also look really beautiful, and you can throw in something like a pink yarrow or even a coneflower. Here's another really pretty variety of yarrow. This one is another pink, and it's called the Millie Rock Rose Yarrow. And let's see how tall this one gets. 10 to 12 inches in height, so not bad, and it needs 14 to 16 inches in width. Hardy in zones 5 through 9, or down to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. And check out this gorgeous heuchera. I actually picked one up the last time I was here at the Home Depot a couple of weeks ago. It is a stunner. This foliage is magnificent. This is called the Mega Caramel. And if you followed my channel for any length of time, you know that I have terrible luck with heucheras coming back in my garden. They will start off okay, and then every year they get a little bit smaller until they almost disappear. They've only ever done well for me in containers. Well, I have found that the caramel version of heuchera tends to do better for me than any other variety had done. And this one is called Mega Caramel, and you can see why, because the foliage is huge. It gets to be 18 to 20 inches in height, 20 to 28 inches in width, water when dry, and hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. But it has a really beautiful foliage. Now, I'm quite surprised that they have this in full sun and they look healthy. They're not crispy, so that tells me that maybe they can handle a little bit of sun, but generally the lighter foliage colored plants prefer a part shade location. So if you are going to plant it in your garden, I would say a morning sun, about 4 hours or so, would be sufficient. But a really pretty variety. And the Sunfinity sunflowers have hit the garden center. Now this is a beautiful annual for non-stop blooms all season long. So if you like sunflowers, but you don't want to grow those tall one stem sunflowers that get huge and that you get one flower from, this is a lower growing branching variety. So it's actually excellent to even put into flower borders. You can grow them in a container. I will warn you that they're pretty thirsty plants. So if you do grow them in a container, they're probably going to require a little bit more watering. So this one is called the Sunfinity Yellow Dark Center Sunflower. It's a Helianthus hybrid, $15.98 for these. And they get about 12 weeks of continuous color, 36 by 48 inches tall and 24 by 36 inches in width. I actually planted a whole border of the Suncredible sunflowers by Proven Winners up and down my front walkway last summer. They were stunning. So these are a really great option if you want non-stop cherry yellow blooms all season long. And I just found yet another gorgeous variety of phlox. So same thing, full sun, give them proper spacing. This variety is called the Bright Eyes, and it gets to be 24 to 40 inches in height. So don't let the size in the container deceive you, because it might look like a short growing variety, but when you actually bring it home, it's gonna grow to that 40-inch height, especially if it's happy. And it says that it needs 18 to 24 inch spacing, water when dry, hardy down to -30 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms early summer through fall. Now phlox is also one that you can deadhead, and then it will continue to push out new blooms. So these are all in the Home Depot house brand containers for $9.98, and tons of buds on these. And look what they have right on the side of it, this gorgeous blue perennial that pairs so beautifully with this pink phlox. Look at that. So pretty. This is a delphiniums called Blue Diamonds, and you can see that they have more of a dainty growth habit. They're more open and airy versus those tall kind of conical blooms that you get with the delphiniums. Tons of buds on this, and this is truly a blue flower. And so this one is called Blue Diamonds. It gets to be 10 to 24 inches in height, so because it's more airy and less heavy, it will stay more upright, which is also wonderful. And it needs 18 to 24 inch spacing, water when dry, hardy down to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and blooms spring through summer. And it wants full sun. What a pretty perennial. Then we have some buddleia or butterfly bushes, and this is a more compact variety. Now, buddleias can sometimes be invasive, some of the older varieties, but they're a bloom powerhouse all season long, and the butterflies really do love them. I also find them to be fragrant. In my opinion, they smell like lilac, so I think they have a really pleasant smell. And this one is called Butterfly Bush Little Rockstar Blue. It still gets to be 5 to 8 feet in height and 6 foot wide in spacing. So this is what I mean about these little innocent looking plants. Make sure to look at that full grown size, because if you tuck this into a perennial border thinking it's going to stay compact and it gets big, then you'll have to move it and it's this whole thing, right? Water when dry, they're very drought tolerant. In fact, butterfly bushes do not want to sit in wet soil. That's the quickest way for them to rot and not return for you the following season. And they're hardy down to negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. They bloom early summer through fall. Now, they're always late to break dormancy in the spring. I find that the leaves don't start pushing out here in my zone 6B, 7A until about mid to late May. But then they bloom nonstop until our first hard frost in October. And you do want to go through periodically and clean them up, because you can see that the spent blooms look pretty unsightly. You just want to pinch those off. You can cut them off, pinch them off, and then it'll keep pumping out these new bloom buds for you. So pretty easy plant to take care of, and again, a pollinator magnet. And then right on the side, they have foxgloves or digitalis, and they are toxic. So if you have children or pets that frequent your garden, probably something to be aware of. But look how pretty they are. A quintessential cottage garden flower. They're nice and tall and upright, giving them a really pretty vertical interest in the garden. And this variety here, let's see what it's called. It's the Pink Panther, and it says that the height varies. It water when dry, and it blooms mid-spring through fall. Now, it is listed as a perennial, but I will tell you that most varieties of foxgloves are biennials, which means that in year 1, they work on root development and foliage. Year 2, you will get these beautiful blooms, and then their life cycle is done. They do self-seed prolifically, so once the blooms are done, you can see here that the seed pods will start to dry out. Once they're dry, they'll crack open, they'll drop all their seeds, and then you'll get seedling babies. And then those will usually bloom about, 2 years later. So they're a little bit of a time commitment, but such a beautiful plant. And speaking of pollinator attracting plants, this one here, the anise hyssop or agastache, also called agastachy sometimes, is a good one. It has these vertical purple blooms and a minty fragrance, which I find quite pleasant. And it also blooms in my garden alongside things like rudbeckia. And because these have that purple coloration and rudbeckia is a golden yellow, they're opposites on the color wheel, which means they're really complementary in the garden. In fact, this one is right here beside this moonshine yarrow, and you can see how pretty that purple and yellow look together. So this is a real good one. I actually have grown the Blue Fortune agastache in my garden for a couple of seasons. It's not always reliable for me. If we get a really harsh winter, they sometimes don't return. But because I love it so much with my rudbeckia, I have replaced it a couple of times. So let me know in the comments if you have found a more reliable variety, because I'd love to add one to my garden. You also have to be careful, because some of these varieties can spread seed and spread around your garden like crazy. So that's another thing that I would warn you about. But if you don't mind, this one is a really good perennial. This variety here is listed as Celestia, but you can see that the color on the tag is more of an orange, so I'm guessing that this is tagged incorrectly. In general, they get to be, I would say, anywhere from 18 to 30 inches in height and about 18 to 20 or 24 inches in width. And speaking of purple spike type plants, check out this beauty. This is Speedwell, also known as Veronica, and the variety is Veronique Blue. It is gorgeous. So pretty. I'm gonna have to find a spot in my garden for these. And because I've already planted a ton of things, my new rule is that I can't buy anything that I don't already have a spot picked out for this season. So this variety is perennial. It likes full sun. It gets to be 4 to 12 inches in height, 15 to 24 inches in width, water when dry, which means that it's a drought tolerant plant once established, and it's hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Blooms mid to late summer. This would be an excellent plant for the front of a border, and it would pair beautifully with things like coneflowers. And some trees. If you want to add some trees to your garden, keep a lookout, because a lot of times when we get into summertime, these trees get marked down. At least that's been my experience. But here we have a clumping tree. This is a redbud. So a clumping version of the redbud. Now I would say that the eastern redbud is a beautiful tree. It is native. It has these large heart-shaped leaves and it gets beautiful fall color. It turns yellow. The only thing I have found is it's not the strongest tree, especially in windstorms. I have a single trunk variety and we've had to cut quite a bit of the branches off over time to lessen the weight of the canopy because it gets quite a big canopy. So if I knew then what I know now, I would plant one of these multi-trunk clumping varieties because I feel like it would be stronger. And this eastern redbud clump is $110 here at the Home Depot. They also bloom with a beautiful purple pink flower in early spring. So they will have flower buds all along the stems, and when those are done, these large heart-shaped leaves come out. And if you want a large tree that is unique, a bald cypress is a great option. These are known as the dinosaur trees. They've been around that long and they can get huge over time. But what's interesting about them is that they are what they call a deciduous conifer. So they look like a tree and they're going to lose their foliage in the fall, just like every other deciduous tree, but they're actually a conifer, which is really cool. In the fall, they get the most beautiful color from shades of bronze to orange to red, some varieties even a golden yellow. And there are even some that are more compact in size that come out yellow in the spring, then go green and then get those fall colors. But a really pretty tree. This one here says it needs 30-foot spacing, hardy to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and this bald cypress is $38.98, which is a great price. And there's what it looks like. Great fall colors, garden showpiece. And you can see that it gets 50 to 70 feet in height. So if you have a large property, this would make a great addition. And look at these adorable dahlias. They have a whole bunch of them. These are annuals. They're called the summer bees, and they look like they're $10.98 per container. And if you want to grow an annual that is super low fuss, drought tolerant, thrives on heat, this is it, Vinca. Now this is a really good one. It is in this 3-pack for $19.98. Each one of the cells looks to have 5 individual plants that you can separate out, or you can keep them together and plant them in a container that way. I personally would split them out and put them along a border. I actually grew a ton from seed this year and planted them in a border, and I'm excited to see how they do. But Vinca is a really good one. And they have a really good variety of Astilbe here in stock as well in the Vigoro containers for $10.98. It's the Bridal Veil. It's a really pretty white variety. Look at that. Now it's all budded up and getting ready to bloom. It gets to be 24 to 30 inches in height, 12 to 18 inches in width, and hardy down to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see all of the budded up blooms that you're going to get. These fuzzy plume-like blooms, really pretty. And then even the foliage is gorgeous because it almost has like a ferny texture to it. So if you want to add some blooms to a shady spot in the garden, Astilbe is a good one. And some daylilies, the Stella d'Oro variety, which is really popular. It has this golden color. It pairs beautifully with things like Nepeta because they bloom around the same time and the colors are really complementary together. Now daylilies are really easy to divide. You get a ton of blooms on them, and they are called daylilies because each flower only lasts one day, but there is no shortage of buds on them. That is, of course, unless the deer come through, because the deer really love these lily buds. They're like deer candy. So that is something that you should be aware of. And sometimes when they're done blooming, the foliage can get quite unsightly, but all you have to do is just shear back all of that foliage and it will reflush out with new foliage. And when it's not in bloom, it just looks like a clump of ornamental grass. And an Ito peony. Now the last time we visited Home Depot 2 weeks ago, we saw the Barzella, which was a beautiful variety of yellow. Well, this one is the Coreopsis, and it has a really pretty blush pink coloration with a deep fuchsia or magenta in the center. Now what's great about Ito peonies is that they are a cross between an herbaceous peony and a tree peony, which means they're a lot more sturdy and they don't need staking. They're also deer and rabbit resistant, and even when they're done blooming, you can cut off those flowers and you just have what looks like a clump or a shrub of green foliage. But this is a real pretty one. You can see some more of the coloration there, and a number 3 container is $39.98. A couple of years ago, I was able to find my Barzella on clearance 50% off. So look around, because once plants are done blooming, they're less showy, which means they often end up marked down. There's the color on the Coreopsis, a real pretty one. And look at this handy poster that they have here at the checkout at Home Depot. It says, keep mosquitoes away with these plants. So lemongrass, catnip, or nepeta, lemon balm, marigolds, lavender, basil, sage, and rosemary. Well, that brings us to the end of the June inventory here at the Home Depot. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out what my store has in stock, and I hope that you can find some of these varieties near you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.